In the far corner of my bedroom there is a great mahogany shelf, upon which are placed 4 old dolls, each unique in its own design. The dolls were collected by my late grandmother, a hideous sociopathic hag that mostly kept to herself in her small cottage in the outskirts of town. She was alone most of her life. My grandfather passed when my mother was just a baby, and my mother moved out in her late teens as the verbal and mental abuse became too much. When they found her, she'd been dead for a week. The mailman noticed the letters stacking up, and getting no response when banging on the door, he eventually contacted the authorities. They found her rotting cadaver face down in the basement. Brain aneurysm, I've been told. In her left hand she was clutching a set of keys. The funeral was brief and vacant, just my mother and me. We shed no tears for her, but buried her with respect nonetheless, on the plot next to my grandfather, and arranged for them to have a shared headstone. I accompanied my mother to the cottage a few weeks later. As the only living relative, the property, along with all his possessions, was hers to keep. I knew she dreaded going there. She'd been putting it off for days, but I finally convinced her to go with me. I only visited my grandmother once when I was a little girl, and I had all these strange memories of the place, none of which I could be sure were real. I needed to visit one last time before my mother sold the property, just to put my mind at ease. The place was not at all what I remembered. Heaps of garbage was piled up against the walls, and the front lawn was an overgrown mess. The smell of decay lingered on the property, and as I stepped onto the porch I felt uneasy. This was no place for anyone to live, I thought to myself. The door pulled open with a strenuous yank, and a rank odor I've yet to smell again caused me to stagger back. The smell of death, no doubt. I covered my nose to the best of my ability and ushered my mother in. With careful steps we surmised the inside, of which bore resemblances with the unkept nature of the front yard. Old cardboard boxes stacked haphazardly about, empty bottles and cans littering the floor, stained plastic bags containing God knows what, and frequently occupying furniture. It was as though my grandmother saw this place as little more than a garbage dump. "Well, this is frickin' filthy," I blurted out. "Language," my mother demanded. "Well, it is," I complained, kicking an empty can of beans across the carpeted floor. We rummaged around the first floor for about half an hour, turning over boxes, searching the closets and cupboards, but it quickly became apparent that there was literally nothing of value anywhere. I still couldn't believe anyone could live here for any amount of time without dying of some sort of filth-induced virus. But then I remember that that's probably exactly what happened to Grandma. "I guess we've seen enough," my mother eventually said. "Let's get out of here, all right?" "The basement, though," I said, knowing exactly how my mother would react. "No, let's not," she stammered. "I really don't want to go down there." The thought made her visibly unwell, and I realized there was no point in pressing the matter further. She was leaning unsteadily against the wall, her face now pale, eyes moving erratically. "You're right," I lied. "Let's just get out of here." I helped her out into the car and found a bottle of water from the back seat. Probably warm by now, but more than likely better than any beverage found on the accursed property. It was all a ruse, of course. I just needed to lift the set of keys from her purse. You know, the ones they pried from my grandmother's dead fingers. "I'll just lock up, okay?" I said reassuringly. "Be back in a jiffy." She nodded and leaned back, sweat dripping from her nose. This was obviously taking its toll on her, but I couldn't pretend to care about that right now. I had to get down to that basement. I had to find out if my memories were real. The basement stairs were hidden behind a veil in the kitchen. You'd usually expect a door there, and I could have sworn there was one when I visited all those years ago, but there was no sign of ever being one there now. I flipped the light switch at the top of the stairs, and a flickering, dim light illuminated gray brick walls and little else. I carefully started descending the stairs, not knowing exactly what I was expecting at the bottom. The first thing that hit me was the horrible smell of death. My nostrils burned, and I had to bury my face in my jacket to avoid constantly convulsing. A fairly large, mostly empty room greeted me as I looked around curiously. There was little worth noting about it, save for a mysteriously well-kept bed at the far end. There was also a distinct lack of dirt and dust, something the first floor made up for in abundance. But I wasn't here for this room. I knew there was something else hidden down here. I just had to remember where. I closed my eyes, trying to visualize the incident so many years ago. I was, about 5 or 6? My mother had reluctantly agreed to bring me over to Grandma for dinner, and I watched her facial expression change back and forth between sad and anxious the entire drive over. She didn't talk much, but she did tell me not to worry about anything Grandma said. Just ignore her was her advice. I found this strange at the time, but I understand everything now. What next? Yes, dinner. Couldn't remember what we ate, but I remembered not liking it. I pretended to, though, but I think my grandmother caught on. We didn't talk during dinner, everyone was silent, something I quite enjoyed. After dinner, before dessert, my mother volunteered doing the dishes, while Grandma slipped quietly down the stairs to the basement, allegedly to get the cake. I just sat there, observing them both, before sneaking off after my grandmother. I found her, somewhere. Where was it? I remembered the large empty room. Why was it empty? She had so much stuff. Why not move some of it down here? No bed, though, so that was something new. A light at the far left corner, just under the stairs. I crept silently, hugging the wall with my back, peering around the corner. There, a door, open, and my grandma. What was she holding? I opened my eyes. Yes, that's it. I quickly paced around the corner, only to face another wall where I was sure there would be a door. No, it had to be here. Or was the whole thing just a figment of my imagination? I sighed deeply as I scanned the area for anything resembling a doorknob or something. Then I saw the spot, just inches from my feet, a dark, humid outline bearing an uncanny resemblance to a silhouetted human body. My grandmother's human body, or rather the leaked post-mortem fluids of her body. Now I knew where the smell came from at the very least. I closed my eyes again. I almost let out a shriek when my grandmother suddenly turned towards me, cradling that strange something in her bony arms. To my surprise, she hushed me gently and ushered me closer, smiling all the while. I hesitantly complied, inching closer with tiny, carefully placed steps. She put a bony hand on my right shoulder, bent down to face me, and asked darkly, "You're a bit like me, aren't you, sweetie?" My eyes shot open. I remembered now. I let my fingers run down the wall in front of me, searching, feeling. Yes, there! A tiny hole in the wall. Maybe, just maybe, big enough for a key. I fumbled in my pockets and fished out the keychain. There were 3 keys. 2 of them I knew what were for. The front door and the shed. The third, I let the key slide into the hole and smiled triumphantly when I heard the audible click as I turned the key. And lo, a door swung open, revealing what I secretly had hoped always existed. I never told my mother what I found. Once I had assurance my memories were real, I locked the door, pocketed the key, and headed back to the car. There was no way I could ever trust she would understand what I found, and she'd already had enough to deal with emotionally. I would come back alone, gather the items, and burn the place to the ground. And I did. The property still held some value, perhaps even more now that the horrible, decrepit old cottage was gone. So it's not like I screwed over my mother in any appraisable capacity. She was able to move on from the darkness of her past, and she appears more happy now than I have ever seen her before. And me? Well, I got the dolls. Of course, don't you remember? Placed ceremonially on the great mahogany shelf at the far corner of my bedroom. 4 life-sized wax dolls, each dressed in the clothes of the children they were shaped after, the hair taken directly from the corpses of the dead children, stare at me with beady black eyes as I lay down every night. Then, usually around 2 or 3, depending on the night before, their small child hands and feet will start twitching ever so slightly, and their heads will start swinging back and forth. Eventually they will fall down from their respective positions and start crawling towards me, with hoarse, ghostly whispers accompanying them, voices of the dead creeping into my ear canals. I will let out a sigh of relief then and smile as I think back to that time in my grandmother's basement. "Like you?" I asked, staring at the life-size doll in her arms. "What do you mean?" She tapped her nose knowingly and she smiled as she offered the doll to me. "Take it," she said, "and I will tell you." I carefully took the doll and let out a whimper as the thing wriggled in my arms. "I saved it for today," she said. "I need something to take the edge off." She giggled heartily and took the doll back. I watched in shock while she demonstrated what she had meant. "Do you understand now?" she asked. I nodded happily. It's a strange feeling, I must admit, but I know I've been missing it my whole life. I think I have always known, even before meeting my grandmother, who I am, what I am. I've instinctively known I have to hide it from the world, bury the thoughts and urges under a well-shaped mask, my true face, my true self, never to be revealed. But now, thanks to Grandma, I can finally unleash that torrent of hate and malevolence without ever risking showing who I am to the world. I take my time with the last one. I always do. I feel the ghost bones crack, and the faint black heartbeat die out as I crush the spirit's trachea, the doll's head now hanging limply from its broken neck. And the first 3 I strangle quickly, just to release that initial built-up rage. But I need to savor squeezing the unlife out of the last one. Taste it, feel it. Their sweet, horrible ghost screams of pain and torture lingering like an angel choir in my ears. Then I gently place them back on the shelf, prop them up all nice and tidy, and then I sleep. My dolls keep coming alive at night, but I sure make them wish they hadn't. Thank you, Spooks and Spookettes, for joining me for this reading. I really hope you enjoyed it. If you did, I would really appreciate a like on this video. If you think you have a story for me to read, I will leave links below where you can send it. Also look forward to reading any comments left down below. If you'd like to join me for more, there's always a subscribe and notification buttons that would really make my day. If you're not ready to subscribe just yet, I hope you will check out my other videos. Thanks again, and wishing you sweet nightmares.